Welcome to a short reflection on 18th Sunday in the Ordinary Time. The Bible presents us God as Father who takes care of His children. His concern is beyond everything. The readings of the day invite us to have proper priorities in our lives and invite us to place our trust in God. The Gospel teaches us about greed, that life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Today's first reading teaches us how to find meaning in life and gives us the understanding that all things in this life, the pleasures as well as the sufferings, are empty and purposeless. There is no real explanation to show how it all works. The author questions what we as mortals get from all the toil and strain that we endure under the sun, when at death we must leave everything behind for someone else to enjoy it. In the second reading, St. Paul advises the Colossian converts that they must look for the things of heaven where Christ is. He wanted that all thoughts to be centered on heavenly things, not on the things that are on the earth. There we find the perfect image of God in Jesus, who is the perfect pattern of life for us. What Jesus absolutely asks of us is that we are not insatiable with respect to the riches of this world, and that we must be ever ready to abandon them in spirit and even in reality, if such is the will of God. Jesus provides all those who are present with a lesson, a parable. Jesus wants to make everyone understand what one must not do. He clarified to them, saying that the one who lays up treasure for his own self, and such a person is not rich toward God. Therefore, the way one can be rich towards God is quite simply to be poor in spirit. The follower of Christ must first of all be a man or woman who is poor in his or her heart. In the Gospel today, Jesus exemplified his point with a story of the rich fool who was totally involved with material things. The rich man in the story was a fool, not because he was wealthy, but because he thought that he could guarantee his own personal security through the hoarding of his harvest without placing his trust in God. This man had wrong priorities. The first was that he never saw beyond himself. He was extremely selfish. And the man's second wrong priority was that he never saw beyond this world. His whole basis of security was his wealth. For him, his money and possessions were everything. Hence, the Gospel tells us that man planned to store his grains in bigger barns and provide for himself with a larger and secure storage place. He indeed had become the slave of the property, and property was not his slave. The final priority was to look for happiness based on material goods. He told himself that he would be indeed happy for years to come. God called him fool, a term that is reserved for those who deny that there is a God. Psalm 13:1. Today's readings ask us to consider another approach altogether, dear friends. It is important to emphasize that Jesus is not saying you must give up all these things and lead a life of bleak misery for my sake. On the contrary, Jesus is offering a much more secure way to happiness and a life of real enjoyment than the way that most people insist on believing in, even though it is seen to fail again and again. Against the greed that obsesses many people, Jesus offers an opposite alternative to security and happiness sharing. In this context, we look at the rich man. In his own eyes, the rich man had been really a successful person. He had convinced himself that he had more than needed for his security, and he could indeed be satisfied and happy. Yet, one thing noticeable is that in this story, no other people are mentioned. The rich man had made himself absolute center of everything. At the end of his teaching, Jesus places the invitation before his audience to give up treasures of this world in order to build treasures in heaven. The lesson from the gospel is obvious. To be in this world and not of it, to collect the necessary goods of this world by honest labor and yet remain detached from them, to possess and not to be possessed by the worldly riches, is an ideal to which our weak human nature responds very reluctantly. Dear friends, Jesus has given us a lesson that greed and selfishness are always powerfully tempting to humankind. They are also very deceptive in that they promise far more than they can deliver. Real wealth and salvation rests in God. May God bless all of us. Amen.